In the intricate realm of technology where data evolves continuously and algorithms redefine boundaries, there are exceptional individuals who not only comprehend this complexity, but also excel in it. Our guest today has made significant contributions in various tech capitals of the world, from the dynamic cityscapes of Seattle and Toronto to the innovative regions of the United Kingdom and Denmark. A visionary in the domain of business technology transformation, an esteemed leader whose strategic direction has been instrumental for major corporations like Sears, Expedia, and Maersk. His expertise extends beyond technological acumen, encompassing the development of cohesive teams and the crafting of visionary strategies that align perfectly with both user aspirations and business necessities. Moreover, he is a proponent for inclusivity, equality, and diversity principles that he integrates seamlessly into his professional ethos. Prepare to delve into a dialogue where technology intersects with purposeful vision. This is ArticulateTHIS. Today we explore the technological sagas of David Coons. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of ArticulateTHIS. This week we welcome David Coons. Welcome, David.
Hey Pat, good to be here.
So, you worked with such giants like Sears and Expedia. Tell us about your journey from the .com boom to now.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. I think the way I think about it and my journey, when I was in university, was right around the time that computers started to get cool. The visual internet started to happen, and I took a crack at my first website build, the first time I ever built something instead of just consuming what was out there in the sort of late 90s. And when I got to Sears, that was one of those things where it was like, oh, like this is really cool, right? We managed our website on 2 servers under a vendor's desk, so we could do everything from moving to, proper distributed servers in our own data center, to building shopping carts, to building catalog management, to, image manipulation, creating product operations for the first time, doing content edit, like all the things that you just do when you've got a scrappy little startup, especially within a big company. At the time we were the biggest retailer in Canada. So it was pretty like a cool first, entry, I guess, into working on an internet site, managing a whole bunch of stuff, starting some pretty cool projects. After a few years there, I moved to Expedia. And, I've done a bunch of stuff, at Expedia over the last 17 years or so. And, spent a lot of time as an individual contributor, working on really boring projects like, moving our data center from Denver to Phoenix. Who knew that a city can run out of electricity? But, these are some of the things that happen when your site takes a ton of traffic. And we moved around a lot. Too. My wife and kids and I took advantage of Expedia's global reach, and we lived in Toronto and Seattle and London, England, and back to Seattle for a decade. And, it was a great ride. I learned how to manage engineering teams. I learned a lot about product management specifically, which, at the time didn't really have a name. When I started doing product management, when you started doing product management, product managers came from box software companies and, real world material goods. So it was a different thing to be a digital product manager before, we really had names for them. And so being able to do that and, being in that job while the world was discovering how important that job was super cool. And then a couple of years ago, I left Expedia. I went to a small Danish shipping company called AP Moller Maersk. That was really investing in technology a lot, over the couple of years before I got there. And I went and, helped acquire a couple of companies and build a product team, and then here I am.
That's amazing. I love, you were not classically trained in this world that we are. Like you were literally learning by doing.
That's right. Yeah. And it's actually like one of my really interesting early memories. Like I really liked computers. But when I was in high school, there was a couple of computer science classes. Like I went to a rural Ontario high school. There wasn't a ton of knowledge. There wasn't a ton of stuff happening, but I'd already done it all. Like I learned how to program, you know, BASIC and a couple of other languages, databases and things like that when I was like 11. So by the time I got to high school, I was so bored with the curriculum that I went, nah, I can't do that. Like I worked in restaurants and I did all the other things that high school students do. And so by the time I got to university, like it had passed me by. Like I had no background in it. I couldn't get into a computer science program to save my life. But because the internet was happening, it was this wave of time when you could be like, oh, I have an interest in this stuff. I like to see how things work. I like to see information presented in different ways. I like to figure out that kind of stuff. And the opportunities existed, we both had this experience at Sears, actually. Like we had one job that had nothing to do with the internet. And then we got a different job that all of a sudden did, that leveraged our background and our interests, and that was the thing. Like I remember talking to my boss when I first got hired there about compiling programs, he used to do on cards and then run them down the hall and feed them into the machines that would read those programs, and you're like, wait, what? Like that level of computing. So, back then, like nobody had any experience with the internet. We were building it, so it was this really interesting time where you could go, yeah, there wasn't really training in that to have. You kind of had to take whatever you had and bring it forward. I think it's one of the things for me that is really the difference between, a product manager that, okay, I trained in product management and I can do it, and somebody who can be a great product manager is just that sort of insane curiosity for how stuff works. Yeah. And when you have that, I think you're unstoppable as a force of nature. So it's really a good pathway into this kind of work.
I will say that being around you definitely helped inspire and teach me about adaptability. I was classically trained in marketing, and then .com boom happened. It was like half those skills were not relevant anymore because it was more like an offline world. So now we went to online, and because of you, I started taking on more things, learning more. I took up HTML, other skills like editing, if it was Adobe type products from Photoshop, Illustrator, like just to learn to apply. Because I remember, back then there was two channels. It was a catalog and a retail. Like this online thing people couldn't understand what that was. I go to a computer and do this. So it was interesting trying to solve that in a company that has been around for 100 years, didn't know how to adapt. So very interesting time.
And it was fascinating too. Like I also remember experiences with our US big brother, and they had a totally different model. It meant we had to figure stuff out on our own. Like there literally was nobody doing what we were trying to do. Sears Roebuck in the US had already shut down their catalog business because they have so many stores all over the US. The really mail order and order by phone really wasn't part of their core operating model anymore. So when it came time for them to go online, they leveraged their retail stores way more heavily than we did. In fact, we ran into trouble a lot with trying to bring the catalog online because it did a lot of cannibalization of retail customers, and people who shopped in stores were getting a decent enough experience anyway online that we were doing a lot of moving business from retail to catalog. And because our company was organized that way, it was very challenging to be that group of people in the middle that you want to represent the weekly vibe that's going on, that's showing up at everybody's door in their flyers and things like that online. But your bread and butter comes from a totally different P&L. It wasn't encouraged as much as you would hope that it would be in a big company, right? It took a lot to kind of thread that needle of how do these two business units interact with each other, because they really internally were big competitors of each other.
Yeah. We're definitely going to get more into that later on because I have some more questions specifically on that, because I think it's very relevant to, the buzzwords that we have today with digital transformation and a lot of other companies that are trying to modernize. And I think we lived through it 20 years ago in that .com boom. But let's get a little bit more just understanding of your background and things of that. So you've mentioned a passion for equality, representation, and diversity in the workplace and the world at large. So, how has that influenced your leadership style and the teams that you built?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is really important to me, and I've got a lot of personal reasons for feeling that way. Lots of allyship with friends and my children and things like that. So bringing that into work um, has always been really important to me. One of the benefits, I think of the times we live in and the companies I happen to work for is that was always also really encouraged. Working for a company, and one of our main themes was, be your whole self at work, and some people, take that to be a little bit of like, okay, that's just some cheeky, corporate buzz for how we're going to try and be better citizens. And some of us really, sort of took it to heart and said, okay, yeah, I'm going to just be honest and transparent and open with my people and try and do that. So, to the point of how that shows up for me, especially as I became a manager and, leader of leaders, building, fairly large teams really meant like watching out for that stuff. I'm a pretty data driven person. So, I would really dive into the data that we had about everything that we could know about people, and lots of early conversations centered around pay equity and a couple of times I'd have a confluence of situations where I had female employees way underpaid. I had a strongly gender biased organization that I'd inherited. And then for me, it's really just all about sharing that information with my team and with my company, looking for ways to find the budget responsibly to fix situations that you find. But sometimes it really just means going and being very purposeful and saying, look, I am, I need to hire a director of engineering. I have no female representation at that level in my organization. I need to build that out, and it's going to take me years to develop it internally. So I'm going to go out and seek, in lots of cases, the best candidate for the job, but I'm going to have a counter bias towards showing the organization roles, people who I want in roles that need that kind of representation. And that really helps the team around that person then like see that that's possible. I learned this lesson from a CTO we had at Expedia while early in my career. And we had spent a lot of time, in my first few years at Expedia talking about career ladders for individual contributors. And, this guy showed up and he basically said, yeah, you're never going to get people to grow to be, principal engineers and distinguished engineers because you don't have any. Like nobody knows what that looks like. You can't look at Microsoft and Amazon and go, okay, that's an apples to apples comparison. So you actually have to go hire people. So you have to take budget and you have to make roles that you need to show people exist so they can see them in the organization. They can see themselves in the people that are filling those roles. And then, more often that makes a team feel like the kind of team that people want to belong to. And it really, really matters, especially when you get into, ethnic representation and, gender representation and stuff like that. You get an organization that's full of, I'm going to pick on some of my former colleagues, but, if it's run by brown men that have immigrated to the US from India and all the managers are brown men and all of the engineers are brown men, it's a very uncomfortable place for women to really find themselves and find themselves successful. So you just start to mix that up a little bit and go and say, okay, look, I'm going to take budget from our whole team and I'm going to make sure that, the women who are underpaid are paid fairly for the jobs they do. I'm going to hire more. I'm going to make sure that my interview panelists are made up of the kind of people I want to be interviewing. I'm going to elevate, maybe not necessarily in job title, but, create a leadership board, as an example that's got the kind of representation I want to see, even if it's made up of a ton of levels. I ran a data engineering team for a long time at Expedia, and I had to go 3 or 4 layers deep in the organization to get, a 50-50 advisory board for me, in a weekly leadership meeting, bringing individual contributors who were, senior PMs instead of principal PMs, because we didn't have any principal PMs. But it was really important for me to have a group of people sitting around the table who had an equal voice to be heard and have their opinions heard and have it influence the direction our team was taking. And then it reinforces itself, So again, that same team, like the more that happens, the more, I'm not going to say the people are the problem, but the more the other people in the organization that are starting to see opportunities narrow because of some of the purposeful hiring we were going to do would just go seek roles elsewhere, and it's a huge company. So not everybody is doing the same sort of aggressive measures that, some of us were doing. So it was pretty easy for people to go and find places where they were more comfortable, and that made more opportunities for us to backfill with the kind of balanced team we were looking for, across a bunch of different factors, really.
Very interesting approach, because I like how you're talking about this is not an overnight thing. It takes time to build it properly, so you don't alienate. You don't do a 180
Yeah.
doing the other way. So you do have to build it in so that you can go, because yes, there's biases and there's those setups, but there's also, if you have never been around it and don't know what to do with it, you're just gonna tend to get something, or
Yeah.
something that where you can trust, especially if you're accountable for something, and you're gonna say, what's my way to success? So if you only know that, that's what you're gonna lean towards. So having support in order to give people leeway to kind of figure it out, experiment, and work towards that ultimate goal, I think that's commendable. I think that's the right way to move in the future. I think the challenge is how do you integrate it with
Yeah.
not alienating people across the board as you try, because people see it, and either people will feel like they are passed over because of a certain look or a way, or
Yeah.
people will not even give credit to people that actually have earned the position. They'll just see it and say, oh, this person just got here because it's a
That's right.
quota or something, right? So doing
Yeah.
something purposeful is important, in doing it over time.
Totally. And, I think the other thing, and I mentioned it at the top of that answer, but it was really important, I think, for those things to be successful. One of the things that helped me was really figuring out a way with the team, like the whole team, to be very transparent about what I saw, so you could do things like, obfuscate some analytics, but go, look, I can tell that, whatever, 60% of the women in our organization for the same job are paid, a significant amount less than um, than their male counterparts. As an example, without naming names, but you could go, okay, like over past review, and literally dig into like past reviews. Some of these people are the highest rated performance-wise employees that the team has, and yet still underpaid. And so I would be very transparent about what I was seeing. We would bring in folks to teach the entire organization. The company really focused on managers and their managers, because we made a lot of the decisions about budget application to salary and things like that. But for me, it was really important that the boots on the ground also understood all of those things. And then in the team, you ended up with a lot less, of that, sort of looking around, pointing fingers, not bad mouthing isn't the right word, but, questioning some of those decisions, because everybody knew what we were doing. It was very obvious when I came in and found a problem. In some places, you'd even, managers who were, some would say negatively impacted by a change in the strategy, would come in and just offer sort of thanks and congratulations for introducing a level of transparency into that process. Most companies, there's very little transparency. You have to be a,
Yep.
superstar hero to get a public badge of honor that, accompanies a promotion. And most of the time, everybody else that didn't get promoted is sitting around going, wait, why that person? I'm just as good. Well, in lots of cases, you're not. And it just needs to be said. And, I think managers have a tough time, being that transparent with people and, that honest. And it's just one of those things that's super important. And it is one of the things that helps that, right? Because again, then all of a sudden you go, look, we're basing a lot of these decisions on data. Before, like, I don't know what they were based on. This was not my show before, but when I get here, we're going to look at things much more empirically as possible, and make decisions that way. And one of the things, we're putting out there, it's not a quota situation, but I think, like you said in your question, representation matters. We know that, diversity of thought comes from diversity of background and diversity of education and diversity of, like, as much diversity as you can possibly get. So for me, I had some directors who were very bent out of shape that, senior individual contributors were invited to a leadership team. Like, I just refused to have a meeting that wasn't made up of a representation of my team. And took them a while to get used to it. But when they understood my thinking and they understood where we were trying to go as a company, how we were trying to rebuild the team, it made a lot of sense to people. And so, it's the kind of thing that then goes, okay, like, I can get behind it. A lot of other people obviously get behind it because now there's opportunities that never used to exist. It stopped being a old boys club and started being something that was, a lot more accessible to everybody. And then everybody else could see that. So it was good.
Yeah, I've seen the cynicism around some of the changes that people do because you still see, let's say, the top leadership that is, but then they just shuffle the middle layers.
Yeah.
But I think how you said it for the transparency is very important. Like, people should not be surprised at any point, like, if they're not performing. Like, I don't understand why that's not
Yeah.
more common to have those conversations. Why can't you
Yeah.
mentor, help, or do something to help people? Let them know, are they on track, not on track? They're, you know, it's unfortunate. I've seen that throughout my career in various places that it's
Yeah.
not there. How, like, I would imagine, you know, like you said, you were introducing this transparency, so people probably were spooked in the beginning because they're like, "What's this guy's motive? Like, why is this guy doing
Yeah.
this?" type thing. So, like, how did you
Exactly.
navigate that?
Yeah. I mean, again, it is one of those, like, it's silly to say, but, like, the more honest you are, like, the easier all of these conversations always are. So if you can have a conversation with somebody without putting on, the airs of manager, I am, in a position to do all this stuff, and start having conversations about performance with people, in a very real, honest, authentic way. It's just a lot easier to have those conversations. You're not trying to make anything up. You're not trying to phrase anything right. Like, you're just being a real person together with another person
Yeah.
who you're trying to help succeed. And, like, I've even had times too where I'm like, I have no idea how to help you succeed. Like, I hear from whatever, like, your manager, that you're not, whatever, cutting my mustard with this, but look, I'm not an engineer. So, but, we just open things up to help people find the mentorship they needed to be better. Had another leader in my organization a long time ago that said, look, one of the management philosophies he had, and I think it's one I took really seriously, is like, there's not, people aren't bad, and if they're not performing a job well, it's more likely it's not the right job for them. And it's a lot different conversation when you can start to have a conversation with somebody about what role might they be better suited for than just harping on performance. And, I was just lucky enough that Expedia was never really a, up or out kind of an organization. So there was always enough room in the budget and the way we manage vendors and things like that, that if you ever got to a place where you had to cut costs, you very rarely had to cut humans that were employees of yours. So it just meant that the conversation could be a lot more authentic with whatever, I'll pick a product manager who was really more, technical product manager or program manager-y, and help them find a role that they could be really successful at. I had a lady that worked for me years and years ago who was just not working out as a product manager, and this is a very junior, sort of entry level product management role. And I helped her, kind of understand where this was happening, and, gave her support and lots of time and intros and things like that to other people. She moved into marketing. She did a fantastic job managing marketing, managing partner marketing, and ended up, a director of the marketing organization, like, and had another 10-year career at Expedia after I decided, that she wasn't right for my team and she wasn't right for the role, but her superpower, the knowledge that she gained just being there, even though she kind of struggled with it, really helped the marketing organization at the time. And, it's that kind of conversation that, is, again, it's a lot easier to have that if you're just open, honest, and authentic with people, like whenever it happens. I read a lot of books on managing people and giving feedback and, all that kind of stuff. And you try and sort of coalesce all of the things you learn about, radical candor or FBI method or any of these kinds of things, and then go, okay, like I can do it my way. Lots of the points of those things are really, you have to be authentic. You have to do it pretty immediately. You can't save up a bunch of critical feedback for somebody's annual performance review, right? That's blindsiding to everybody. You don't want to sit down for a review, whether it's every quarter or half a year or every year, and then surprise everybody with, look at all the things I've been saving notes on for the last year. Look how bad you are. This is why you're not getting very much of a pay increase or none, whatever. You start to work on it ahead of time. And then, people either go, oh, okay, cool. Like I understand where you're coming from. I understand what I need to do, and they can decide for themselves how to do it. It's a lot easier when you're just open and honest with people about it.
You said some key things there. So one, transparency is obviously number one, but I think it gets down to, does the organization believe in people or not? Because when they don't, it's clear. It's just strictly numbers. The masquerade. Like I've seen, there was a SaaS company that, they made people believe like they were all family, this and that, and they were like, it's a great company to work for. And then a little blip comes in, and massive layoffs. Like, wait a second, I thought we were family. Like, how did you didn't necessarily need to do that massive layoff, but you were just trying to save a quarter or do something like short term adjustment. So I think there's a lot of that. You see the true authentic organizations versus the one that will always, they show their true colors, right? As soon as the tough gets going, how they treat employees, how it happens, that's how reputations are built and made.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I learned my lesson, in all of these things as an affected employee a number of times, through restructurings and things like that. Like I mentioned, I was traveled around a lot and, was an international employee of Expedia, especially, and a couple of times you go through these things where it's just like, well, we're restructuring things. So all of a sudden there's a whole group of people, and you get an experience living in a country like the United Kingdom, where they have a lot of protections built into general employment law, so whether you're, part of a organized, collective bargaining agreement or not, you sort of go through this, what feels like a weirdly transparent process that for me, that just informed sort of the rest of my career. So as I moved into leadership positions and kind of had to be, one of those people that was deciding how we were going to structure teams and what parts of the world we were going to invest in or de-invest in, and, what ways we were doing that. That just sort of came along. So it was a pretty interesting proving ground, but I saw it, like teams that had that, sort of level of transparency and that experience just ended a relationship feeling a lot more cared for, even if, our employment was, coming to an end or whatever, was happening. There's a lot of things you can do to soften the blow financially for people. And I, again, been lucky enough to be part of big companies that, have had fairly, I would call them satisfactory severance packages for a lot of people. And, part of that, again, at Expedia, as we've grown so big internationally, that we started modeling our US policies after the policies we were, sort of forced to adopt by having employees in Germany or employees in the United Kingdom or, wherever. Which just meant that, again, it was a lot easier to have those conversations with people because we could still feel like family. We didn't want them to feel like they weren't valued members of the team, even when we had to say goodbye, especially when it's for something like, I don't know, like COVID happening, or, a couple of bad quarters means we have to reinvest in a bunch of different ways, or, save money. Like, there's just so many reasons to go and say, oh, okay, well, we just launched a new thing that has shifted the way we're going to do a whole bunch of business. So, we no longer need, this giant engineering team focused on that. Some of them get redeployed, but some of them, do not. It made it a lot easier to kind of have that model and have people in the company with that kind of experience that could still authentically, treat people like, not family, but, work family.
Yep.
People that you care about. They care how this person is going to go home and, share this news with their family and, like talk about it and talk about you, like I think you mentioned it, right? Like you want to be the kind of person that then helps your company be the kind of company that has a reputation for, having to do these things because business is business, but being able to handle them well. I think it's really important.
So the only thing I'll say, like to counter that, like, so I am aware as well, like some of the European countries, they have some pretty good, like you said, they do it in a way where they look out for the employee, they set things up.
Yeah.
But the counter of that, how I'm seeing some of those European companies navigate that is that they end up creating a very toxic work culture to kind of encourage the person to quit as a way instead of having to package them out. And I've seen that at a couple of places already where they do it. So I don't know. I think it's great that they have it. I think there's, it's important to have strong leadership and monitor the culture. But that I would say that's the only risk. That's a risk at any sort of place, those tactics that are done.
I totally agree. And look, I mentioned this too, right? There's a lot of managers at a big company like that, and everybody brings their own experience to it. I have worked with and for people who came from much more toxic team cultures than I was trying to create. And, as a manager, it makes it very difficult then to try and create this little bubble of, excellent transparency and authenticity inside a larger organization that's a lot more toxic. And it's, for me, it's not the way, so again, it's one of those opportunities for me as a leader to go and say, look, there's a bunch of company line stuff I'm going to do, but we're not going to be that kind of that team, and if, that ends up being my kind of way. Like if you want to be that, toxic about work, you don't really have a place here. And usually that helps the people who want to foster the wrong kind of culture within your team to take their own opportunity to move on, which again helps a lot with the retention of the people that are creating the kind of culture that, you want to have in your team as a leader that, I think helps your company grow. I think one of the challenges is you see some of the, big tech companies, especially, have kind of a reputation for, I don't know, employee brutalism, and they're successful in spite of that, not because of that. But it's hard to read between the lines and get that, from people. But if you're the kind of company that burns people out in 4 years, like it's a very difficult company to imagine people wanting to work for long term.
That's such an interesting topic in itself. That's probably a separate episode we'll get to, because you start talking about leadership styles. You look at some of the most celebrated entrepreneurs were tyrants, or are still tyrants. They the way they run their organization, the way they do things. Sure. But on the flip side, they end up creating these amazing things that have helped us shape society. So questioning, is there a way to do it that it doesn't have to be that way, right? I don't know the answer to that. I would imagine there it could be, but the people we tend to celebrate are the ones that have those representations of being very aggressive and mean spirited. Is I'm not even sure the right term to use, but not the kind person that says that looks at it. It's more the reputations are not the greatest behind the scenes.
Yeah. And I think you're like, it is, I don't know either, because I am not one of those people. I'm more of a, operator at a company, if you will, rather than a tyrannical, obsessed founder. So it's my experience is, I can come on and, help scale an organization that maybe struggles, but not necessarily create a tyrannical dictatorship from the ground up. And, like I said, like one of the things that happens, and you certainly see it when, you work and try and hire and retain people, in a market like Seattle, where, at the time I moved there and started working for Expedia, Microsoft was probably our biggest competitor for talent. Amazon had full catalog, but certainly not the behemoth that it is now. And we didn't really compete. Like the roles that we were hiring for were just very, very different. When I left Seattle in 2021, like everybody, all the big companies had big offices there, and it's like, I don't know, mercenary hiring. Like, they're so successful with their products that make so much money that they can afford to pay a premium for a toxic culture, right? So, I think as an employee, lots of times you go to a company like that and you get excited by the financial benefit that's going to come your way.
Yep.
If you're have the right kind of attitude and the right kind of personality, or in the right kind of position where you can find something that, works in a team that, doesn't necessarily have to work that way, you get a good long career there. But there's lots of teams that people just get chewed out, and spit out of the company because you just can't keep that up for that long, right? Like you kind of cash out whatever you can cash out, and just be thankful that you got a 30 or 40% premium on your time for the time you were there, and go back to something a little bit more sane, or, startup that you're going to do your own thing, and you're vowed you're going to create a totally different culture than the one you just got spit out of for, whatever happens to be. I've never worked for those people, so I don't know for sure, but it's definitely not the kind of thing I could imagine doing for very long.
I usually use the analogy of a sports team, because you could have a superstar that is amazing, but they are extremely toxic. They kill, like they're not good for the team, right? Team play will always be the one that wins you stuff. Like, sure, there's some generational athletes that could do amazing things, but those are very rare. But they seem to, if you're the best player on a team, they embrace you. But do you create a toxic culture, or do you create one that you really believe in team? And a lot of it is, again, around incentives, about their big contract, what they have to do. So getting players to buy in to a team culture is challenging in some sports. So I see the parallels there, because when you're, and then again, to play on that further, in sports, when you're winning, everything's fine. When you're losing, that's when the knives come out, and everyone's on the chopping block. So I see the parallels.
Yeah, for sure. And that's really true of corporate, like anything, right? Like not even product management, although there's definitely some parallels you can play there. But the bigger your team, the more it is like managing a team through wins and losses, and rebuild years, and trophy winning years, and all of that stuff. It's much more nuanced than just the one person that makes headlines all the time by scoring as many baskets as possible. Baskets is that what they call it?
Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about product strategy. So,
sure.
In your words, how would you define product strategy?
I think about product strategy is really like the whole book about really what a product is supposed to do, all of the things that it needs to accomplish from a user's perspective or a customer's perspective, the important things it needs to do for the company, and then literally down to the detailed plans and iterations that you're going to go through to get it there, which is a little bit different than the way like many people think about a product strategy, more as like, kind of what's your North Star, which is a key component of, I think, a product strategy. But for me, it's really the whole kit and caboodle. Like, not only what is it going to be at the end of the day when it grows up and is a fully fledged, whatever Facebook marketplace, but what do you do to get there? What tools do you have to bring to bear? What releases do you have to have? What teams do you have to have working on it, building out different bits of everything that you're going to deploy to kind of see your way there, over a, what usually is a multi-year journey. It's hard to have a North Star that's too close. So we tend to put them out there, far, and then figure out, sort of working backwards, which is an Amazon thing, but really, like, if you go and say, this is what it's supposed to be at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to try and figure out all the ways you're going to try different things to kind of get there. So that's, for me, it's sort of the whole package.
Yeah. And, thank you, because you kind of introduced that type of thinking to me, and from our time at Sears, just knowing, because it was such a we had to think strategically and mix tactical in there because the vision was so grandiose compared to where we were. We had
Yeah.
to figure out, we had to think of those short-term steps to long-term. So, which this leads into my next question here is, when defining a product strategy, how do you ensure it aligns with the company's vision and then larger goals?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it. It's kind of a core part for me of product strategy. So, you don't really have one unless it does. You might have a great product idea, um, but until you vet your idea and test out, some of your hypotheses about what might work and what might not work, and start to learn what it can do and balance that against where the company is trying to go and what the company is trying to do and what the company is trying to be about. You don't really have a product strategy. So, for me, that is really the thing. It's really making sure that the company's goals, objectives, metrics, whatever business unit, even like it doesn't even have to be the whole company, but wherever you're getting your, you know, the butter for your bread, largely in product development, you know, you are not usually responsible for the P&L. If you have some P&L insight, it's because your product does something, to generate revenue for the company. But there's usually a GM, whatever. Anyway, you've got somebody who's decided, I want to, invest more in marketing, or I want to invest more in technology, and those show up in very different places on a P&L. And I think as a product manager, it's super important to understand how the gears of the company work. How does the company make money? Where does the revenue come from? What pays your salary? And then make sure that what you're building is going to do more of what you need. Sometimes you get some directives, right? Like, I know we're going to have a money loser until whatever, some 3 or 4 or 5 milestones down the road happen. So there's an investment now in the future. But, it is really important to be aligned on what those things are. If you're building something that's supposed to drive top of the funnel traffic to your company, and all of your success is measured on ultimate conversion rate at the, checkout, it's very difficult to evaluate your performance, because there's probably 7 other teams in between you and the ultimate, end door wallet, credit card swipe, that you really need to then understand every one of those things. And how do you influence all of those things? Anyway, we're getting off track and kind of into some of the details, but yeah, that's the point. Like, being very aligned on what you're supposed to do, what your product's job to be done is, what the company needs your product to do. I think is super important when you're creating that overall book of play. How are you going to go out and get this done? It's super important to be aligned all through that. And it could be a shifting thing, right? Like, you could literally say, hey, we know we're driving front door traffic with this thing and we need to drive more of it. But once we do that, we also need to take responsibility for shoving it down the next step of the funnel. So how are we going to do that? And how are we going to balance that out? Because there's a bunch of different places people can go, right? We're selling a whole bunch of different stuff here, and we need them to keep buying all the things, at the very least, as well as they are today. Hopefully we can improve some of that stuff. And so your product's metrics, the things you care about your product doing, all of a sudden can shift, and if you know that ahead of time and you understand the evolution of a product and how it's going to be nascent and grow, and once it's mature, how it's going to perform, and then at what point is it in its decline because you're coming behind it with something else that's doing a better job of, something. I think is super important to, at least think through. Like, you don't have all the answers until you start doing some stuff, but at least know, okay, there's going to be some decision points along the way that help us pivot if we need to, or adjust our, plans.
So you let
Strategy.
in.
Sorry.
No, apologies, but you did lead in. We're gonna kind of build off that for the next question, and so I'm gonna ask you this question, and then I'm gonna tell you why this came to mind, and I'll let you answer it that way. But so, can you share an instance where a particular product strategy made a significant impact on a company's direction or success? And before you answer that, the reason why I brought that up was because now I may be giving you undue credit or not, but from what I remember back at our time at Sears, is that you were positioning the company to really be what Amazon is today. For context, Sears Canada at the time had pretty much infrastructure all over Canada, warehouses. They were set up to what Amazon has basically built today. For them, it would have been, I'll say, an easy pivot, but obviously there was heavy financial burden that they would have to do upfront. Just moments ago, you were saying, you have to think of what those milestones are and those costs. And in retail, when margins are very low, having to go in front of a stock and say, hey, we have to invest and take a loss for this amount of quarters. No one wants to do that. But on the flip side of that, because they did not do that, they did not make that strategy, they were out of business in less than 10 years. So I'm not sure if that was, I remember you being part of the contingent going up to present sort of that vision. But I'm not sure if you can or want to speak to that. But then if you give any other examples of like how you, the strategy.
We can certainly talk about that a little bit. It was interesting, and I thought about it, when I was thinking about my career journey, especially, because honestly, the deal we did at Sears with Amazon, which was hot on the heels of Amazon doing basically the same thing for Target, is what, kind of caused me to walk away from this place I'd, sort of loved to work for 6 or 7 years. And the interesting thing for me was that, and we just talked about it a little bit, like what are the decision points that you put into a product strategy? We had a lot of things that we were trying to do what Amazon was doing, right? The Amazon at the time didn't sell anything really but books and music and small stuff like that. So as we went through this, I don't know, we'll call it negotiation with Amazon, we figured out what the plan was going to be. We were going to launch powerhouses.ca with Amazon, which we did after my time, but it was successfully launched. What became really clear was that, and again, part of the way that our company at the time was structured, we had all this infrastructure all over the place. We had a live ordering system that kept track of inventory. We had a shared pool of inventory for e-commerce and our catalog business, and our e-commerce business when I left Sears was $200 million. Our catalog business was $1 billion. So we were significant, but we were not, we weren't ruling the roost yet. But it was really important to maintain that. Like, we just couldn't carve off online inventory, right? It had to be part of this distribution system and the network of warehouses and trucks and delivery people and pickup centers and the way we had it structured. And our core metric for the Amazon deal was saving money. We were paying millions of dollars a year to IBM for a software product that we used to manage our catalog and website. We were paying millions of dollars a year to a couple of vendors that, kept doing stuff. We had a very expensive digital production group that, we spent a lot of time putting our content that was created for print into our digital catalog. And all of the Amazon stuff was designed to save us money. But because we had this core piece of infrastructure that we could not back away from, we actually did not save money. We spent money because we had to pay Amazon. And we kept having to pay IBM because we still needed the very expensive software product to keep our online orders and our offline systems and our warehouses and order management systems.
Can I pause you there for 1 second?
Yeah.
So I just want to give you more context on so the climate of the day as well. Like at this time, Walmart is getting bigger. Their whole thing was cost cutting and efficiency, and they were exposing Sears at that level. I think that's where the pressures were coming. And I'll even just add even more color when we talk about the opportunity that was missed. Was we still see today huge U.S. retailers that want to come to Canada. A lot of Canadians that want those American brands try to come and they have to leave because it's too expensive. Like that could have been a solution to be leveraged if it was done properly, where you could do that, and maybe that could be the way to counter Walmart. But maybe that's what Walmart does now to help do it to compete against Amazon. I don't know, but that's That's interesting. So sorry, I just wanted to throw that in there for more
No,
context.
no, that's right on. Yeah, it was whatever 20 years ago almost. So there's a lot of what was happening in the world 20 years ago. Like people don't remember a time when Amazon didn't exist in Canada, but Amazon did not exist in Canada. Then there was you could buy stuff from Amazon.com in Canada, but it got shipped to you from the US and you paid a lot for it. When Amazon finally did launch for real here, I remember their deal was with Canada Post, because Canada Post, other than Sears, was really the only distribution company out there that could do the level of parcel delivery that they needed to Canadians. It's just a huge country with very complicated trade
Geography.
and things like that, and geography. But like I think when U.S. companies tend to, at least back then, ignored the fact that it was a totally separate thing. I think one of the things that Sears, before we got there, even before we were born, did and realized was that if you don't bring your products directly in from where they're manufactured into the country or make them here, it's way too expensive. Like you cannot import something to the United States and then import it again to Canada, because that just adds layers of cost onto it. And it's one of the things that makes it very difficult for a US company to come in a small way, right? Like you saw Walmart very quickly back then, come in, open stores like, whoa, like it was, and that's the only way you can do it. You just need enough retail footprint. You can't do it the way Target did it. You can't come into a country like Canada, take over a few Zeller stores, which let's face it, hadn't been invested in a long time. Put the big Target logo on it, bring some brands in, and like every truckload of goods just costs way too much, right?
Yep.
Like you have to have a merchandising team up here. You have to have a buying team that goes and gets separate contracts for stuff, or at least brings their own stuff in, through Vancouver or wherever, to get it to your stores. Otherwise,
it wasn't the true Target experience either. Like what people who went to like south of the border to go shop at Target, they did not get that experience, and that's where they felt cheated even more, which exasperated the issue.
Yeah, totally agree. Anyway, unless you want to keep talking more about that, I also did have I think a story that is a little bit newer, a little bit. I think it's modern, sort of commerce, and about, I guess it was 2015. Probably we announced this, but when I was at Expedia, we bought several companies over a couple of years. The first was this Australian travel company. We then bought Travelocity, which we had already been powering for quite a while. And in the fall of 2015, we announced we were going to acquire Orbitz, which was kind of the only other big U.S. Multi-product travel retailer out there, other than Priceline. And our playbook had always been, keep the brand, shut down the tech, move it over to our platform. For lots of companies, for What If and for Travelocity, and introduced whole new lines of business. All of a sudden you could do packaging, you had amazing hotel deals, you had more flights than anybody had ever negotiated for any of those smaller sites. Orbitz was an interesting one because Orbitz had, of course, been started by a coalition of airlines, so they already had a ton of airline content. But what happened for us was that the playbook didn't exactly materialize in the same way, because what we found was a company that really, inside the company, actually looked a lot more like Expedia than any other company had before. A technology team and a product team that had been building things. And we found some tech there that we felt like, oh, this is really important, and I think you'll appreciate this. Expedia didn't have this capability, but Orbitz has spent a lot of money building a almost, an early no-code solution for marketers to be able to spin up landing pages and tweak capabilities on their homepage and websites and do things for partners and advertising partners that, it was a manual job for us to do at Expedia. And so we decided we were going to invest in this configuration management system to integrate it with our platform, which was not easy, took a long time. We finally did it. And we had a lot of success with it. Basically unlocked the power of that, especially in the MarTech space, supporting our marketing teams, kept investing and kept building. Well, a couple of years ago, right before I left, actually, what we realized was that stuff was so successful that all the other things we were doing were like really insane, so it kind of became a core to the company's sort of platform strategy, where what we were trying to do, we built up multiple different websites over years by investing in them directly, right? We had a president of hotels.com, we had a president of Expedia, we had a president of Hotwire. They all had their own tech teams. They all had their own investments in all of these things. Their infrastructure was largely different once you got above, sort of common supply technology. And what we could do with this configuration management was actually start to absorb some of the capabilities of that, of those other sites, and repower really the world. And the platform strategy at the company really pivoted around this ability for not only our own employees, but then we felt like small business owners, travel operators, people that managed travel agencies, people that manage tourism businesses like a surf school or things like that, could actually use the same tools to manage their own portal into travel and unlock and to make available to them and their customers the inventory that was available on Expedia. It was really interesting just to sort of draw that connection, because without continuous investment and that, what we were talking about, like figuring out when the product is doing what it's supposed to be doing, when could it do more, how every once in a while you go back and you go, oh, this product strategy for this was so good and so solid that we made such the right investments that the whole company now can go and say, actually, you know what, we could change the way we operate by using this product in a different way, in a more core, more foundational way to the business. So I thought that was really, for me, that was one of the, a little bit, not, super more recent, but a little bit more, decade more recent anyway, than not chasing the Amazon model. But yeah, I thought that was a good, sort of leverage point where we went, oh, there's something that we don't want to throw away.
Yeah.
And how can we, incorporate it? And we just thought from a pure technology, business enablement capability perspective. And then all of a sudden it became, really a core way that the whole company started to operate their platform overall and offer it out to the world.
So how do you measure value, especially when the metrics are not available yet?
Yeah. We talk about that, a lot in leadership, because you're trying to encourage people to think about, I mentioned it earlier, you think about where your paycheck comes from. You think about how you contribute to paying the bills. So for me in a product, there's always something, I think it's kind of lazy product management to say, I'm doing something that's so whatever, like I can't figure out what metric should be. Well, you need to work harder. Like it's going to do something if it's live. I guess if it's just an idea and you're building something from scratch, you don't really know whether it's going to go save somebody money or make somebody more money, or, whatever, sort of part of the P&L you're going to lever your SaaS product into. But, working at big corporations, it's usually fairly straightforward to say, oh, okay, look, I'm working on a piece of technology, even though it's a, field for field replacement of a back office tool for finance professionals. Like there's productivity gain, or there's whatever, speed of paying invoices, or, whatever it happens to be. There's always something that is the primary job of the thing this product is supposed to fit into. That is the metric. And everything in a company translates to either money in or money out. So for me, it's always just about going through that process of saying, okay, what is this thing supposed to do? Where is the leverage? Maybe you don't know how much it's going to improve it, but it's supposed to improve it. On my teams, we always used to, I did a lot of, migration work and, sort of, we talked earlier, digital transformation work, moving things online from offline, or moving things from legacy systems. So for me, there was always a threshold of like, be no worse than the other thing. We want it to be better, but the kill criteria is not better. It's not better enough. It's not worse. So you could move forward and go and say, oh, like the bar is pretty low, or at least it's appropriately set at where the current business is. All your future iterations post minimum viable products can build on the things that you find when you get the thing released, rather than, worry about it too much ahead of time. Like if you bake too much amazing goodness, especially in digital stuff where you can just keep iterating and iterating and iterating, right? Even in SaaS products, you find one customer that it works for. It doesn't have to work for all the customers out of the box or out of the gate. You can iterate and acquire more customers and add features that work for more customers. Shopify didn't build itself into an amazing shopping network by doing everything for everybody all at once.
Yeah.
It had a very specific target market. It worked on tools and features that work for those people and their businesses. And as it added capabilities, it attracted more businesses and more businesses till, now they're integrated with the Walmart marketplace. And
yeah. So I was just about to ask you, like, what are the initial steps you take to validate that product strategy? But I think you just kind of answered it there. You get very specific on a user to validate that, and then from that you just see if that works and expand. Is that kind of the answer to that, or is there anything else you do?
And that's how you govern everything from that initial development and the success of that to every pivot that you want to make, or every like left turn you want to take with your product, or new feature you want to add, or fork in the road where you might say, oh, okay, this worked for that, but I want to do a different thing for a different group of people, and only the core of that is going to work for those people. And you sort of build up that track record of like, okay, the more you do, the more data you get, the more information you can use to help you make those decisions. But yeah, I mean, I always start with what's the simplest thing. And I'll give you a perfect example. I talked a little bit about taking over this team and a while ago, when I was at Expedia, but we found a whole bunch of teams that were babysitting, like things that had been built, and they'd been making enhancements and things like that over. They called them products. They weren't really, they were just sort of automated jobs that produced data for people in the company. But I remember asking one of the product managers what the person used this data for, and whatever they explained, they use it for some analysis that provides some other executive. And I'm like, so we have like a 3 or 4 person team like dedicated to this data set, and they're constantly working on improvements. They meet all the time with their stakeholder, but it was literally like one stakeholder, like one analyst that kind of told them what to do. I'm like, well, what's the value? And they're like, well, I don't understand. I'm like, well, what does that person do or provide to that executive that pays for the $1 million a year of salary I'm paying you for? Like, it's $1 million, guys. Like, does that thing make $1 million or save $1 million or contribute some way to that? And they just couldn't answer the question. And for me, it's that just the sort of basic level thinking. Like, what is the person who's asking me for this thing? What am I going to do with this thing based on this observation I found? How is that going to do the thing that pays the bills, that lets me keep working, on my thing, and every once in a while we'll do a random thing. Like you go, oh my gosh, like we've been working on something and haven't had any success. I need to pay everybody, and it's easy when you work for a big corporation because their paychecks come whether you're successful or not until they don't, but then everybody gets laid off. So that's a problem. You try and avoid that. Every once in a while, and you take a thing where you're like, oh, somebody asked for this thing, which isn't really part of our core product strategy, but would work. The system can do that thing. It isn't really what we want it for, but it would give us a win, even if we take that win, bank the 6 months of business it's going to give us, and then replace it with our new thing after, because we know it's not the way we want to work. And that is a really successful strategy too. So it's just like all of those things that come along where you're like, hey, is my initial assumption correct? Like, I don't know. How can I validate it? I can go check with people. I can talk to people. I can look at the data. I can really think through logically, what's happening. If you were running a 4-person startup and paying everybody in your credit card, you literally know every week how much you're paying everybody and how much money you need to bring in to keep paying everybody. Think about your product that way. And it's a lot easier to keep going than it is when you get lazy about it.
I was just actually going to ask you, like, how do you balance between user needs and business outcomes impacts? So you kind of answered it there, but is there anything else that you would want to add to that?
I think, Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, knowing that, and in larger companies, if they're, especially if they're publicly traded, they have their stock. You mentioned if you're a startup, the owner has that credit card bill, so
Yes.
where the pressures are. So how do you balance between what the customer needs are, and then what do you do to survive as a business?
Yeah. It's kind of like, yeah, it's interesting. You do, I think the thing I would add is that you do really have to kind of understand, some of those macro, like, economics of your situation, right? The founder with three people helping them build something, you're very close to everything and everybody is very close to it, right? You're often either online together all day or sitting in the same room. It's a lot easier to keep up on what's going on and what's going well and validate what's happening and feel the pressure about, doing something faster. Uh, with a big company, it is a trick to be able to sort of do that and really understand what your contribute, like a 4-person team, like this one I was talking about with my, like, oh, we could do this one thing that pays the bills for 6 months. Like, nobody's really going to come knock on our door and let us go. That's not the environment we worked in at the time. But what they can do is get sick of waiting for you to find success and reassign, the whole organization or, just part of the organization and hamstring your ability to do more stuff. So for me, it's always super important to just be able to do that and validate it with everybody that owns your P&L or is a stakeholder to how you're doing, or, finds a super important capability that is needed in like I said, a back office application or something like that. Some other team consuming your service, if it's a service, is critical. The gone are the days of we're building, big monolithic things, right? Everybody builds these tiny little bits of application that do the thing they're supposed to do, and they're easy to throw out, they're easy to replace. Validating that it's always doing what it needs to do and getting some insight into what comes next is, for me, that's like the number one job of product management. Back to your, I don't know, back to your coaching sports example, right? Like, if your star player is 2 years away from retirement, if you convince him to stay and re-up his contract, now you need to start building the bench to replace that person, and even if you can't replace that person with, I think the term you use is generational, player, like, you need 4 people that can do the job, and if you don't have them on the bench already, well, your fans are going to have to suffer 2 years of rebuilding.
Yep.
Because you didn't have the foresight to plan ahead for it. The athletes can't play forever.
Yep.
One injury kills them, but even aging takes them out of professional sports. So, you kind of have to always know, okay, what's next for me? What's the next thing? It's going to be in our backlog, or the next, what's the next big fork in the product strategy book, that we're going to take, that we're going to, keep going and doing.
So, technology is rapidly evolving. So, as a because of that, also consumer behavior is changing as well rapidly. So then, how do you ensure that the product strategy remains relevant over time? Especially as, like, I would say how much technology has evolved in the last 5 years alone, beat the previous 15 years. So
Yeah.
now that you're seeing this, the speed is like increasingly, it's ridiculous how quickly it's coming to the market. How do you stay relevant?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I stay relevant by reading a lot and consuming a lot. I think as a product manager, you have to do that too. And then that knowledge, you just have to have a very good practice of filtering that knowledge into your organization. If you're a leader that manages a bunch of product managers, or directly into your product roadmap, how do you prepare for Microsoft announcement a couple of years ago to, invest so heavily in GPT, in OpenAI, and incorporate GPT into a bunch of stuff. And, how do you end up, you need to have a product that can leverage the things that are coming, or you need to be able to figure out how to pivot, right? I've worked for companies, and I've only worked for these 3 companies. So you take your pick of which one I'm talking about. Worry too much about building brand new stuff that doesn't do the core job your company is doing so that it can leverage new technology. You're thinking about it wrong. In lots of cases, you can get an early headline but it very quickly, because of the speed of innovation in the world, loses focus, loses interest. Like nobody's super jazzed about your AI powered chatbot Expedia anymore because you haven't done more, right? You haven't fully integrated some of these things that are making news. The thing for me that becomes really interesting, and especially for product managers, like thinking about their products in the today world, is how easily these things are being like offered to consumers where they never used to be before, right? Like you really used to require the resources of a decent sized company to be able to offer tools that are now available to, one developer through a portal that they've made, like, oh, I've got a new AI resume generator situation because I've got one smart guy that knows how to code against GPT's AI API, and you're like good to go. When we started, like we need a whole company we paid millions of dollars to write code that would do that kind of stuff. And it's just easier, right? Now you can get some of these tools to write the code for you that incorporates them into other parts of a platform. And if you're not thinking that way as a product manager, even in a big company, it becomes very difficult to keep up, So I think that for me is always the thing, like what's out there, where is it going? Where is it now anyway? At the very least, you start to think about how you would incorporate now capabilities. You start to see at least how far apart your product is from the world where those capabilities could be integrated. And then like all the things we talked about in building a product strategy and building a North Star and whatever, maybe we used to get away with building 5-year plans for, software development and big features. And now it needs to be a little bit quicker. But, the reality is the tools are a lot better that help us build things quicker now and release things quicker and change the part of the internet we're responsible for, or the app we're responsible for, or whatever it happens to be, a lot faster than we ever used to be able to. So for me, it's like, yeah, you got to keep on top of the information. You got to read a lot. I mentioned up top, you got to be insanely curious to do this job well. And I think if you are, then, it's a little bit easier to imagine a future where you're incorporating these capabilities into your products and you're pivoting your products to go there. Or you're thinking about replacing them with something that's like just fully baked, that way, because every product has an end of life. Even if you can't see it because you're managing it right now, there's definitely a time when your thing is not going to, if it still exists, it's not going to look anything like it did today.
So I was gonna kind of ask you more like, how do you stay updated? So you mentioned a lot of reading of I guess books, articles, things of that nature. Anything else that you do? I remember from the early days of like working with you were actually doing things. You were actually like experimenting, things of that nature. Do you do anything like that now? Are you experimenting with anything? Are you keeping yourself?
Well, I don't code, but I don't really have to anymore. So the things I play around with as a, interested, I don't know, not third party, but an interested person, like, I play around with GPT as an example to do things like, content creators out there are advising everybody to do, right? Like act like whatever I need you to act like and give me some feedback, be my lawyer, act as my, lawyer in Ontario, Canada. Here's my will, and see what feedback it has, right? I'm working on a book, sort of idea. And one of the things I ask it to do is go be my editor because I don't have one and I'm going to try and self-publish, and GPT can come back with lots of good advice. So like I play around with stuff like that. I read a lot of, content curated and created by, people that I trust and people that have reputations in different, areas, that kind of thing. And then you look at crazy stuff on Reddit and, everywhere that's entertaining, but every once in a while you find a nugget that's entertaining enough that makes you curious enough about something that then you go, dig in and learn a little bit about it. That's, I mean, use the technology that we've all built over the last 20 years to, help stay abreast of all the things.
Is there any platform or something you would recommend for someone who wants to kind of stay sharp?
Well, I, follow folks on LinkedIn who publish on Medium or Substack or, whatever, and subscribe that way to newsletters. I, follow a bunch of people in different industries on X that talk about the things that I'm interested in. And subscribe to lots of their free stuff. I haven't ever yet come to a place where I'm paying for stuff like that, because generally, that information's out there. Some of it's in my head. Sometimes I just need somebody to remind me of it. But yeah, I spend a lot of time kind of reading that kind of stuff on platforms like that. And again, it depends on what I'm looking for or what I'm interested in. Different platforms are better for, certain things. If I want to know how to beat a particular challenge on Forza Horizon, Reddit's great for it. If I want to learn how to use GPT, I go and read some stuff about people that are doing it for maybe not exactly what I'm using it for, but things that are tangential.
So let's have some fun, some lighthearted questions now. If you had to compare, and we kind of talked about this already a little bit with sports, but if you had to compare it to any sport, which one would it be and why?
Yeah, I'm not really a sports guy, but I have tried to use your analogy as we go.
Or you compare it to something else and not sport, compare it to something else.
I thought about it, and actually, I think that the analogy, especially for product manager, or specifically maybe a multidisciplinary leader in product delivery, I think applies to anything, what professional or amateur sport. But I really think of this job, as the head coach or GM, that kind of level of role. You do really need to think about the big picture. You need to think about the whole team. You need to think about the back office staff. You need to think about all the things that go to make your team do what it's supposed to do. And you need to be thinking future enough. We talked about building bench strength and some of those things. Those are really analogous to how you build a backlog of a product roadmap into your product strategy. You need to learn how to see the signs for when you need to pivot, right? Somebody coming up from college or wherever you source players from in other countries, wherever, you need to pay attention to those things. You need to pay attention to, the way the fans are reacting. Some sports, they keep changing. I mean, at least from when I was a kid, I just realized this year, because I never ever paid any attention before, but that they don't do signals between pitchers and catchers anymore. They've got some technology that does it, because their cameras are too good. That you used to be able to read them, and they'd watch them in the other dugout, and they know what pitches were so you have to pay attention to that kind of stuff outside of your control as a product manager, to incorporate that stuff and figure out how to, work with all of that stuff in your team. So for me, it is one of those kind of central, almost organizing roles. And we always used to call them, sort of managers without authority, in Expedia, especially when I was coming up, because, you're telling engineers what to do, in a sense, not how to do it, but certainly we're going to go do this in this order. We're telling a senior vice president who might have P&L responsibility how long they're going to have to wait for a pet project or a pet feature, and, influence up and down and all around. And, so I think for me, it's not a particular sport. I think it's about a role that applies to all, organized sport, and certainly sports fans can understand that.
So I'll add to your example there with the stealing of the signals. I think there's a YouTuber that he made. I'm not sure if he used AI or not, or some sort of algorithm that he did, where he went to Little League games and was putting the signals in, and then with a high predictability, he was able to know what the pitch was going to be. So I'm not sure if he got in trouble with this or not, but it was funny because it was they were changing Little League games because they were doing this. There was high tendencies. It was hilarious, but it's amazing. Everyone finds different ways of how to introduce technology innovation where it really disrupts. And to your point, that something so simple had a massive impact.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? That, I grew up in the 70s and watched ball then. You couldn't tell what was happening. Pitches would happen, and you'd be like, I don't even know. Now there's a box on the screen around the strike zone, and the pitcher only has however many seconds they have to let the ball go. And camera technology got so good that you have to change the rules of a sport, or else the sport's no fun.
Yeah.
And it has to be playable and enjoyable. And it's one of those interesting things, especially about professional sports, where the facets of a marketplace, the NFL, are so complex. There's teams and owners and players and fans and advertisers and the league, and everybody has a very different set of things that make it successful for them. and you have to try and build a product, which is the rules of football and the games that get played over the course of the season that attract everybody, and constantly being aware of all of these things like innovation in television cameras matter to the eventual evolution of a thing. And like, what happens if all of a sudden, you've got an entire bullpen full of people that need 15 seconds to throw a ball, and now they only have 9.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know whether you can pivot that quickly. Certainly not everybody's going to be as good because they're going to be hurrying, to do something. But 5 years later, the generation of pitchers that comes out that learned how to do that in college is much better about getting a pitch and letting it go so that you can do it, and it's a stupid, rule example, but, you get the idea. Like, if you're not preparing for that kind of stuff as a product manager, you can't do it. Like, you're going to lose. You're going to fail. You're going to not be in the game anymore.
So throughout your career, looking back, is there any sort of funny or unexpected moment in your journey that kind of makes you chuckle? The first thing that comes to mind, from our experience was back in our day at Sears was the person that was saying the internet was a fad ended up they gave it to him to run it. They said, okay, now you figure it out. I thought, that to me, I still laugh about that. But is there anything that comes to mind as far as like any funny experiences?
I had a personal anecdote in mind, and it's one that I get reminded of every once in a while. And one of the guys that eventually became our CTO, he reminds me of this every time I see him. We were talking in a product review, which was a big monthly meeting. We eventually ended up getting our CEO, literally to come and spend an entire day with the product team every month, hearing about what was going on. And one of the teams that I was managing was talking about delivering an experience for a customer error, like literally something that happened that you could predict was going to happen. Obviously, customers couldn't predict it, but it just ended up in like the site no longer working for them. Like, it threw them to a blank, whatever. And we were delivering an experience for it. And the argument raged on one side of the table about how we knew this was going to be the right thing to do and how whatever. And I just went, let's stop talking about this. There isn't anything right now. There's going to be something tomorrow. It's going to be better than what we have. And then the conversation stopped and moved on, and I didn't really think anything of it. And this guy just came up and he's like, I can't believe you just like shut down 15 executives who are arguing about this whole strategy that you put in place to go improve error recovery rate basically for a customer. And just we're like, we don't have anything. Something's better than nothing. Enough. And we chuckle about that like every time. But yeah, I mean, those stories are full of like that, right? Like, whoa, you've got an idea, and your idea is the opposite. So now you're in charge of making it work. Oh, I spend my entire career, first 15 years or 14 years at Expedia, complaining about the quality of data that came out of our data engineering team and data warehouse, and then not necessarily through the accident of reorg, but as a reorg happened, it very quickly became my job to go in there and go, okay, now I need to go make sense of this. Like, sometimes it just is like, oh, okay, who's the most critical of this problem? That guy. We should definitely give that guy a crack at seeing if he's all talk, no action. Those kinds of things are funny. But yeah, poor Gary, he just couldn't get over the internet winning.
Let's take some time for some reflection and advice. Now, looking back, is there any piece of advice you would give your younger self starting in product or technology?
I think I learned it eventually, but I would love if somebody had told me how critical relationships were to get stuff done in like any organization really. And it's whether you have, if you're a small founder, of a small startup, your organization that you need relationships with are, people who are going to give you money, it's a different network. But inside companies, it's kind of the same, right? Like, you need to know some very critical people. You need to manage those relationships. You need to curate them. You need to hopefully do more for those people than they do for you. So at some point you can come knocking on their door for a Hail Mary move that is just going to make stuff happen. I think that's number one. And then the other one that, it's really only occurred to me, like over the last couple of years, but I spent a long time, and when I worked at Expedia, I could kind of proudly say like I'd only ever worked for 2 companies in my entire career, because before we worked together at Sears, on the internet. Like I'd already worked at Sears for 5 or 6 years in a store. So I had this big company experience, and I really drove my career through doing things that I found interesting, not for any other reason, right? And there was a couple of times in my career where I found myself like a little bit, maybe it was behind financially or whatever. And I think I would have taken the advice to move around more seriously earlier, like a good solid track record of experience at a bunch of different companies, still doing interesting things, I think would have been a more valuable experience now than, doing the things that I felt were really interesting at the time. It's hard to talk about all the internal workings of a company. In our first part of this conversation, like we went back and said, okay, for everybody, this is the context that we were operating in back in 2002, 2003. It's really hard to do that every time you want to tell a story or, convey an experience when you have 15 or 16 years at the same company. You can't write everything on your resume. You can't, the stories require so much setup because you have to understand the historical context inside your company of what you're doing. There's just a lot of things I think career-wise that, if I'd taken that advice, or taken it seriously, I certainly worked with guys that did that, back then even. But we always laughed at them, like these were guys that were moving around for promotions or, whatever. And even if I had gone to different companies for different experiences, I think it would have been pretty bad.
So, for the listeners who are budding product managers or tech enthusiasts, what would be your top 3 tips to make their mark in the domain?
Yeah, I think first, and I give this advice, like I talk to a lot of people actually who are trying to get into product management through, out of university or whatever, they're taking some master's program, whatever. The number one advice is try and find a role that is related to your experience, so especially if you're coming at it from a different career or a slightly different discipline, especially in tech. I talk to a lot of engineers who want to become product managers. I talk to a lot of project managers who want to become product managers. All of those people have experience in a certain area, and instead of just broad brushing the entire industry, looking for any product management role, finding one that is in a niche that you're already comfortable with makes it a lot easier to sell people on your skills and experience while you develop the specific ones for product management, especially if you're, in a sort of mid-career pivot or you've gone back to school or whatever. So that's number one, stay close to home for your first role or two. If you've been an engineer in a financial services organization, go be a product manager for one. It's a lot easier of a transition. Thing two, definitely develop that insane curiosity. I've mentioned it a couple of times. It's buzzwordy for product managers, but it's super important. If you do not care how the world works and figuring out how things work in the world, it's going to be very difficult for you to be an effective product manager. That is one of the core principles of this job. So I talk to people about just find anything that you care about and figure out how it works. That's product management. Even if it's something like, road construction or, home construction or NFL organization, but whatever. If you don't care about how anything works, you're just happy going along, then you're probably not going to be a very successful product manager.
Amazing. Well, thank you, David, for joining today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, I think best way is LinkedIn. I've got all my other stuff there. I do some coaching and sessions and stuff like that through a platform that makes my availability easy to book, but you can link me there, which is a lot easier than any other complicated URLs. LinkedIn's good.
Amazing. Well, thanks again. And remember, everyone, stay curious and keep learning. Take care.
Thanks, Pat.